432. If you'd like to turn to that, 432. We are slowly winding down the book of Acts. Hopefully, by the end of July, I'll be through with this book of Acts. Today in the 25th chapter, partly in the 26th, but mostly. Jerusalem, and then because of a plot to kill him, he was transferred to Caesarea and had a trial before by a man named Porcius Festus, and Paul was still in jail. 2 years later, Paul was still there. They still had not brought any formal charges against him. That was one of the reasons he was still held. The Jews wanted him. The Jews actually wanted him put to death, and the Romans could not find anything that was significant enough to put him to death. So Festus arrives on the scene, and every time I see that name Festus, I think of Gunsmoke, and I know it's two different people, but anyway, that's what I think of when I hear the name Festus. But I'm sure this fellow was educated, and in all honesty, Festus seems like he's more interested in trying to do a good job with Paul than Felix did. Felix was after money. He was wanting somebody to offer him a bribe to deal with Paul in the way that they wanted him dealt with, and nobody ever did. Felix ended up being put to death. Well, I don't know if he was put to death, but he was banished. He didn't have anything to do with Paul, but the Jews in Caesarea and the Gentiles in Caesarea had a problem with each other, and they could not solve their differences, and Felix intervened with the military of Rome, and it was such a military force that it was just carnage of some sort, caused much bloodshed, and he was really recalled to Rome and would have faced severe penalties, except he had a wealthy brother named Paulus who intervened on his behalf and kept him from being put to death. This was somewhere around the years AD 58, 59. And we believe that Festus was then the governor sometime around AD 59, and he actually died in AD 62. So he just served there for a few years. But the change was really not to Paul's advantage. Felix had the letter from the captain in Jerusalem, and so he knew that the Jews really didn't have a charge to bring against Paul, but Festus didn't know all the background, and he wanted to keep the peace with the Jews, so he went to Jerusalem to meet with them. And when he met with the Jewish leaders, the first thing they brought up was the fact that they wanted something done with Paul. Now you imagine this. It had been 2 years since Paul was arrested in Jerusalem, over 2 years now, because he was in Caesarea for 2 years. It was over 2 years that he was in the custody of Rome, been out of Jerusalem for 2 years in jail in Caesarea, and the Jewish leaders, the only thing they wanted from Festus was to do something with Paul. They had that hate that they had harbored in their minds and in their hearts for all of this time, with Paul totally pretty much out of the picture, except they knew he was still in jail in Caesarea. Festus knew that if he released Paul, the Jews would revolt. And Felix had just been recalled because of his dealings with the Jews when they revolted in Caesarea. The problem that Festus had was, like I said, if he released Paul, the Jews would revolt. But he was holding a Roman citizen in jail that no charges had ever been brought against. And I told you last week that the Roman citizen was the backbone of the government of Rome. Everything revolved around the rights of the citizens in Rome. Paul avoided being beaten and scourged because he just said, is it legal for you to do this to a Roman citizen that has not been convicted? And boy, everybody cleared the room. And yet he was being held in a Roman jail without charges being brought to him, and had been there for 2 years. So Festus set out to do something about this. I think he really set out to do the right thing and keep the peace. But the Jews still harbored this hate in their heart for Paul. Now, they wanted Festus to have Paul shipped back to Jerusalem. But the reason they wanted Paul brought back to Jerusalem was so that they could kill him in transit. Remember when he was transferred to Felix in Caesarea, there were 470 Roman soldiers that accompanied him. But Festus wouldn't have known all that. And he probably would have sent him back with 2 or 3 men, or maybe one guard, because Paul was not a violent criminal. And it would have been easy for them to waylay him somewhere between Jerusalem and Caesarea, and they were going to put him to death. But Festus said, no, he's in Caesarea. I'm going back to Caesarea. You all come with me and bring your charges against him there. And so we go, they do that, and he appears before Festus, and it's a repeat of everything that took place last week in last week's sermon. Same charges, nothing substantiated, no evidence to back up their charges, and Paul gives the same defense that he did before, and he said, and what he basically says is that I have lived all of my life he says, I am standing before Caesar's tribunal where I ought to be tried. I have done no wrong to the Jews, as you also very well know. He wouldn't go back to Jerusalem. There was no guilt found, no verdict given. Festus realizes that there's no reason to hold Paul, but then he's got the Jews on his back that he's got to deal with. So what does he do? How does he get out of this situation? He says, Paul, verse 9 says, but Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me on these charges? The Jews were just trying their best to get Paul back into Jerusalem. And there was no guilty verdict given, no reason for a guilty verdict. But Festus really didn't understand the Jewish law all that well. And so he thought, well, let's go back to Jerusalem, and these charges have to do with your religion, and we'll try you there on these charges. And Paul said no. And like I said, the Roman citizen was the king of the country, and the governor had no authority to transfer a prisoner, a Roman citizen prisoner, to another venue without that prisoner's permission, without that Roman citizen's permission. And Paul said, no, said, I'm not going. I'm standing before Caesar's tribunal now, and this is where I have ought to be, and I have done no wrong. And if I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything worthy of death, I do not refuse to die. But if none of these things is true of which these men accuse me, no one can hand me over to them. Paul knew his rights as a Roman citizen. And then he said, I appeal to Caesar. He probably just used one word, appelle. And with that one word, he stopped the Jews in their tracks. Because the Roman citizen had the right to appeal. And he made his appeal to Caesar. Now, you remember that somehow the Lord had appeared, excuse me, the Lord had appeared to Paul and said, just as you have testified about me in Jerusalem, you will testify about me in Rome. Not only did Paul get to Rome, Rome paid for his transportation to Rome because he appealed to Caesar. And Festus said, when he had conferred with his council, you have appealed to Caesar you shall go. How long do you hold a grudge? These Jews, the one who caused the problem to start with, were the Jews from Asia. We could go back through the book of Acts as we have been since Paul was converted, and the Jews in Asia were part of the ones that stoned him and drug him outside of the city and left him for dead. They'd been trying to get him in court. They'd been trying to put him to death. And they had come to Jerusalem for the feast day. And they saw Paul in the temple and they thought, this is our chance. The Asian Jews, the same Jews that had persecuted him on his journeys out into the countryside. But now they were gone. They weren't the ones appearing before the governors. It was the Jews in Jerusalem that had harbored this hatred for Paul for more than 2 years. A fellow named Wayne Dyer wrote, anger is a kind of influenza that incapacitates you just as a physical disease would. Anger is a choice as well as a habit. It is a learned reaction to frustration in which you behave in ways that you would rather not. In fact, he says, anger is a form of insanity. For 2 years, these Jews had been crying in their hearts, kill Paul. To anyone who would listen that was an official of the Roman government. I read a story, could have been something that somebody actually saw. An eagle swooped down and picked up a weasel, held it in its talons and started flying off. And in midair, all of a sudden the wings stopped. The eagle fell to the ground, dead. Because the weasel, in turning and twisting and trying to get free, had bitten the eagle, killed it in mid-flight. If we cling to an attitude of anger or jealousy, it will, like the weasel, sink its teeth into us when we least expect it. Hatred. It must have infuriated the Jews when by one word, apollo, Paul had removed himself completely from their hands. I told you earlier this was somewhere around 59, 60. Felix had died in 62 AD, so this was around 60, somewhere in that vicinity. The temple was completed. They had been working on this temple for years and years. It was there in existence when Jesus was there. But it wasn't finally completed until AD 67. In AD 70, the temple and Jerusalem were destroyed. From AD 60, the anger and the harboring of the grudge against Paul and against the Christianity that had grown from the Jewish religion wasn't a sect of the Jew, was the fulfillment of the Jewish religion. But because of their rejection, in 10 years, their temple was destroyed. In the 19th chapter of the Gospel of Luke, this is right in the middle of the triumphal entry. As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side, and they will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you." Their hatred, their anger toward Paul, toward Christianity as a whole, brought about the fulfillment, the prophecy that Christ had made on the way to his crucifixion. If we have anger in our hearts, if we're harboring a grudge or animosity against anyone. We need to get rid of it before it destroys us, because it will. It will destroy us. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for bringing peace to our hearts. I thank you that you provide a peace that brings us contentment even beyond our own understanding. Your word tells us that it is powerful enough, that you are powerful enough, that of the two kingdoms, the Gentile nation and the Jewish nation, that you made them both one through the blood of your Son Jesus. So help us to know that any animosity or anger or grudges that we're harboring within our hearts, that through you there is peace, there is solution. Help us to turn any such situations completely over to you. Give us the peace that passes understanding. I pray in the name of your Son, Jesus the Christ. Amen.